At the flower-viewing banquet, a silk flower slipped out from the sleeve of the newly appointed top scholar. On a sudden whim, the empress said she would arrange a marriage for him. He lied and claimed he had admired me for a long time, and that he had picked up my silk flower and secretly kept it because of it. That day, I really had lost a silk flower of the very same kind, so I believed he truly loved me, and I agreed to the marriage bestowed by the empress. I lived in confusion throughout my marriage, and by the time I realized something was wrong, he had already become a favored courtier of the new emperor. In the end, he even drove my eldest sister to her death for the sake of noble consort Shu in the palace. Crying, I asked him why, and he told me, "Ju Yi, marrying you was never what I wanted. That silk flower was actually a gift from noble consort Shu. You only got to marry me by basking in her favor. And now, your sister has merely repaid that debt for you." In a fit of fury, I drove a hairpin through his throat, but to my surprise, I returned to the day of the flower-viewing banquet. Without hesitation, I immediately swapped the silk flower in my hair with the one worn by General Hess' daughter, beside me a woman who had been desperate to marry for 10 years and still had not succeeded. In the middle of the flower-viewing banquet, the empress suddenly offered a prize and had everyone present compose a poem on the spot. All through the feast, people competed to show off, and before long, it was the turn of the current top scholar, Chen Yuk. He stood tall, with handsome features and refined brows. The moment he stepped forward, he drew the secret glances of the noble young ladies in the hall. But just as Chen Yukek bent in salute, a silk flower slipped from his sleeve and fell to the floor. The sound of it landing was faint, yet it happened to catch the eye of the empress upon the high dais. The empress's gaze landed on that silk flower, and with obvious interest, she looked toward Chen Yuke, whose expression had subtly changed. The silk flower that slipped from the top scholar's sleeve, could it belong to the lady in his heart? The empress's eyes swept over the bashful noble girls below, and the smile on her face deepened. The spring scenery is lovely at today's flower-viewing banquet, so I may as well play the good person and unite a pair of lovers who are of one heart. I wonder which young lady gave this silk flower to the top scholar as a token of love. Top scholar, you may speak plainly. I will personally bestow the marriage and bring this happy match to fruition. The fingers hanging at Chen Yuk's side suddenly tightened, and the expression on his face stiffened for an instant. Still, he was not without scheming. After that brief flicker of panic, he quickly concealed the oddness in his expression. He lifted his robes and knelt toward the empress in thanks. "This humble subject thanks your majesty, the empress, for your grace. This subject has admired the second young lady of the prime minister's manor, Shui Jui, for a long time. Today, after obtaining this silk flower from second Miss Shui, I was overjoyed and dared to secretly keep it, if only to comfort my lovesickness. Taking this opportunity, this humble subject wishes to ask for the hand of the second young lady of the Prime Minister's manor, Shui Ju Yi, and marry her as my lawful wife. I beg your majesty to grant it. It had been exactly the same in my previous life, only back then I was still young and naive." Looking at the silk flower in his palm, it truly was the same style as the one I had lost while strolling through the garden. So I jumped to the conclusion that he had long hidden deep feelings for me, that his affection for me was sincere and profound. On the day he won top honors, I too had seen with my own eyes the sight of the top scholar riding through the streets in glory. At the time, he wore the bright red festive robes of the Zhuangyuan. His features were gentle and elegant, his bearing like a jade tree among orchids. He was also the dream lover of countless young ladies in the capital. A maiden's heart is tender and unformed, and I was no exception. In secret, I developed a measure of fondness for this top scholar. I thought to myself that he was gifted in both talent and appearance. Though his family background was thin, he was still not a bad choice for a husband. So, when the empress intended to bestow the marriage, I nodded and accepted. For the first few years, he truly did count as a good husband. He never treated me harshly in the slightest. In the rear courtyard, aside from one bedchamber maid, he had no other concubines or mistresses. Everyone in the capital praised my good fortune, saying I had married the man of my dreams. Only I, in the course of our day-by-day life together, gradually sensed that something was wrong. He treated me with gentleness and courtesy, yet always with politeness and distance. There was never even a trace of the deep affection he had professed at the flower-viewing banquet. At the time, I was simply too naive and foolish in the end. I thought it was only his natural temperament, reserved, detached, and not good at matters of love between men and women. By the time I began to notice the clues, it was already far too late, and there was nothing I could do to turn the tide. After the crown prince ascended the throne and became the new emperor, Chen Yuk, relying on the many years of support from the prime minister's manor and benefiting from the care of my elder sister, the empress rose steadily through the ranks. He took a place among the emperor's close ministers, and for a time his power shook the court and made him the hottest figure in the capital. By a chance opportunity, I finally learned of the schemes he had been carrying out in secret. So all these years, though he had appeared to depend on the Shui family, in truth he had always been secretly working for noble consort Shu Jijun, to help Shu Jijun compete for favor and solidify her standing in the deep palace. He had taken risks again and again. At the time, I could not make sense of it, no matter how much I thought about it. My eldest sister was the reigning empress, and she had even borne the new emperor's eldest legitimate son. As for noble consort Shu Jijun, her family background was ordinary, and she was not especially favored in the harem either. Yet, he insisted on taking the long way around, exhausting all his effort to support a noble consort Shu, who seemed to have no future at all. It simply made no sense. I knew full well that some earth-shattering secret had to be hidden within all this. Even in my shock, I forced down the chill in my heart and chose to endure in silence. All I wanted was to find proof of improper dealings between him and Shu Jijun, and then expose them in one stroke. But in the end, I was still one step too slow. Chen Yuke had been plotting for many years, and his scheme ran far deeper than I had imagined. The new emperor had been suspicious by nature to begin with. Chen Yuke carefully set up an elaborate chain of schemes and falsely accused my eldest sister of defiling the imperial harem. In a towering rage, the new emperor issued a decree on the spot, stripped my eldest sister of her title as empress, and cast her into the cold palace to preserve her honor and to keep the family from being implicated because of her alone. She had no choice, in utter desperation, but to use her own life to prove her innocence. After my eldest sister died, the new emperor's fury eased somewhat, but even that was not enough. Father had no choice but to submit a memorial requesting resignation, then take the clan and move back to our ancestral home in Guju. And yet Chen Yuke, the true culprit, stepped on the piled white bones of my Shui family and soared ever higher. In the harem, though, Shu Jijun was not favored. With a powerful minister like Chen Yuke planning for her from outside the palace, she still gained quite a few benefits. I burst into Chen Yuk's study and demanded to know why he had done this to my eldest sister. By then, Chen Yuke no longer needed to pretend to be a good husband. He slowly raised a hand and tucked back a loose strand of hair by my temple, his movements carrying a false note of tenderness. Ju Yi, do you know that asking to marry you was never my true wish? It was nothing more than a temporary expedient forced by the circumstances. The hatred in my eyes surged like a storm, and the golden hairpin hidden in my sleeve pressed so hard into my palm that it hurt. I forced down the bloody sweetness rising in my throat, and, with reddened eyes, demanded of him, if marrying me was not what you wanted, then why did you pretend to be so deeply in love at the flower-viewing banquet all those years ago and ask to marry me? Chen Yuka let out a soft sigh and turned to open the rosewood brocade box beside his desk. Inside the brocade box lay a familiar pink silk flower. Even after all these years, it had still been preserved beautifully, without the slightest trace of age. He gently picked up that silk flower, and his eyes brimmed with tender attachment. This silk flower was given to me by noble consort Shu, back when she was still a crown prince's Chengwei. It was only because, when I happened to run into you at the palace gates, I accidentally saw that you were wearing a silk flower of the same kind. So when the silk flower fell during the banquet, I had no choice but to tell the empress that the flower was yours, and that the woman in my heart was you as well. But didn't you accept it without objection? In the end, the only reason you married me was because you borrowed noble consort Shu's light. The position of my lawful wife was something you owed her in the first place. Since that is the case, let your sister repay it for you. I trembled with rage. He actually had the nerve to twist defiling the imperial harem and deceiving me into marriage into something that was somehow my fault. I tightened my grip on the golden hairpin hidden in my sleeve and, catching him off guard, drove it through his throat. His blood gushed out just like that. Chen Yuke stared at me in utter disbelief, as if he had never imagined I would really strike at him. I knew very well that once he died, I too would not survive after assassinating a high-ranking court official. With that thought in mind, I wrote a suicide note, clearly stating his illicit affair with the imperial harem and his plot to frame the empress. Consort Shu in the palace was not especially favored, and she was rather foolish besides. In the past, it was only with Chen Yuke repeatedly helping her scheme and plan that she managed to gain a foothold in the palace. The new emperor had always been suspicious by nature. The letter I left behind before my death would surely drive a thorn straight into his heart. Consort Shu's days ahead were likely not going to be easy either. After that, I calmly took my own life. Who could have guessed that I would return to the flower-viewing banquet from my previous life? I stood outside the palace gates as the cool breeze slowly blew away the days clouding my heart. I lifted a hand and touched the silk flower in my hair. This silk flower had originally been mixed in with the various reward items from the Eastern Palace. In my previous life, I had thought it exquisitely made, and it matched the flowing fairy skirt I was wearing today. So I had pinned it in my hair. Now that I thought about it, only the women of the Eastern Palace should have possessed silk flowers of this exact style. What a pity that I had only figured that out at the very end in my previous life. I swept my gaze around, then quickly walked over to the only daughter of General He. This Miss He was someone extraordinarily famous throughout the entire capital. Madam He had married into the general's manor and, over the course of several decades, given birth one after another to 5 sons who were strong, sturdy, brave, and skilled in battle. Only when she was nearly 40 had she finally given birth to this precious, dearly cherished little daughter. And yet, Hiruer had perfectly inherited all of General Hess' looks and physique. She was tall and powerfully built, well over 8 feet in height, with a sturdy frame and tremendous strength. Even ordinary men trained in martial arts were absolutely no match for her. As for her face, it was practically a copy of General Hess's sharp, brows, deep-set eyes, heroic features, and an imposing bearing. Her temperament was just as bold and fiery, and she always did as she pleased. Not a single young master from the noble families in the capital dared come to seek Miss Hand in marriage. Ever since coming of age, Hiruer had set her heart on finding a handsome young man to marry into the He family. But despite being desperate to wed for 10 whole years, Hiruer still had not managed to find the husband of her dreams. Whenever the young gentlemen of the capital heard Hiruer's name, every last one of them avoided her like the plague. They were terrified of being forcibly dragged off to marry into General Hess Manor. A few days ago, when the results of the imperial examination were posted, Hiruer had brought a whole group of servants with her to seize a husband right there beneath the ranking list. She had actually frightened the third-place scholar into fainting on the spot, and because of that, she had become the laughingstock of the whole city. From that point on, no one dared have anything to do with the eldest miss of the general's manor. In this life, I was willing to gift Hiruer the marriage she had always wanted. I quickly made my way to Hiruer's side, her striking figure impossible to miss. Seeing that no one nearby was paying attention, I turned slightly and leaned close to her ear, lowering my voice just a little. Miss He, I know the wish you've held in your heart for all these years. Today, I'm taking the initiative to offer you a fine marriage match. Do you want it or not? The moment Hiruer heard that, her tiger-like eyes lit up at once, and her voice turned urgent and expectant. Second, Miss Shui, are you serious? Which family's talented young master is it? Though I was determined to take revenge on Chen Yuke, I was by no means a vicious person. I did not want to casually ruin some innocent woman's life. Hiruer had never offended me. I could not seek only my own satisfaction. The pros and cons of this marriage ought to be explained clearly to her in advance. The choice should be left in her hands. My expression remained calm as I truthfully told her about Chen Yuke's true nature. This man is Chen Yuke, the top scholar of this year's examination. His appearance is indeed breathtakingly handsome, but his character is troubling false and selfish, and there is already someone in his heart whom he cannot forget. No matter how fine the face, a man like that is no good match. If Miss He minds, then let's forget the matter. I absolutely will not force you. After hearing me out, not only did Hiruer show no sign of retreating, she instead waved her hand carelessly. What's the big deal if his character is bad? And what if he already has someone in his heart? All I want is a pretty young man to marry into the He family. As long as he can make the household look good and continue the family line, that's enough. My father and brothers are all at home. Once he marries into my family, everything will naturally be up to me. So what if he has someone else in his heart? Could he really dare stir up trouble right under my nose? She patted her chest, clearly brimming with confidence. People always say that a twisted melon isn't sweet, but I don't believe that at all. You won't know whether a melon is sweet until you twist it off and taste it. And even if it really isn't sweet, if you keep eating it long enough, you'll still chew out a bit of flavor eventually. Once I received Hiruer's definite answer, my heart finally settled completely. I removed the pink silk flower from my hair and placed it into her hand. Then, all Miss He needs to do is exchange the silk flower in your hair with mine. You must remember this when we go view the flowers later. Make sure to walk around in front of the other noble ladies a bit more. Let everyone clearly remember that you were wearing this style of silk flower before entering the hall for the banquet. Take this silk flower off and hide it away. After that, just wait and watch how things unfold. If nothing unexpected happens, then tonight, Miss He will be getting herself a handsome husband. Hiruer was overjoyed at once and thanked me again and again without the slightest hesitation. She took the silk flower from her own hair and exchanged it with mine. I put on the silk flower that belonged to he Ruer and, just as in my previous life, spent time in the garden admiring flowers before attending the banquet. Only this time, when Her Majesty the Empress asked whether I was willing to marry Chen Yuke, I refused. Your Majesty, this subject's daughter is unwilling to marry him. The silk flower in top scholar Chen's hand does not belong to me. I do not know why the top scholar insists on dragging me into this. The deep affection on Chen Yuke's face froze instantly. His eyes filled with shock and disbelief, clearly never having expected me to reject him. But after only a brief moment of panic, he quickly steadied himself. A slight furrow appeared between his brows, and a look of grievance and confusion rose onto his face. What does second Miss Shui mean by this? Second Miss comes from a distinguished and noble family. If you look down on a poor scholar from humble origins like me and are unwilling to marry beneath yourself to me, that naturally I can understand. I would never dare force this marriage, but this silk flower clearly belongs to you. Second Miss, why would you deny it in front of everyone? Though he had spoken only a few short lines, every single word was calculated in just a handful of sentences. He had painted himself as a pitiful man whose sincere devotion had been cruelly rejected. Meanwhile, he had turned me into a shallow, heartless, status-seeking girl who despised poverty and loved wealth. If I were still the me from my previous life, these words alone would surely have forced me into helpless panic, leaving me no choice but to compromise for the sake of my reputation. What a silver-tongued, scheming top scholar. To protect himself, he could casually drag a noble young lady into the matter, ruin a woman's good name, and still present it as some grand gesture of devotion. And I, a perfectly innocent young woman, was being forcibly tied to a marriage for no reason at Alayat if I refused. I became the one who despised the poor and chased the rich. The reason he was so desperate to pin this silk flower of unclear origin onto me was nothing more than fear that its true owner would come to light. His vicious intentions were truly nauseating. I sneered inwardly, but my expression did not change in the slightest. With perfect composure, I took a silk flower stained with flower juice from my sleeve and held it up for everyone in the hall to see. I do not know whether the top scholar truly remembered wrong, or whether he is doing this on purpose, intent on forcibly dragging this subject's daughter into the matter. Today, while strolling through the garden and admiring flowers, the silk flower I wore from beginning to end was this very one. It was only because it was accidentally stained with flower juice in the garden just now, and the mark harmed its appearance, that before the banquet began, I removed it and hid it in my sleeve. My belongings were never lost. So where exactly does this claim that the top scholar picked it up come from? The top scholar keeps insisting that he has admired me for a long time, yet he cannot even tell what I usually wear. Isn't that kind of affection far too perfunctory and fake? The top scholar has dragged this subject's daughter into the matter for no reason, tarnishing my innocence and ruining my reputation. I have more than enough reason to suspect that his intentions are improper. At my words, the expressions of everyone in the hall shifted one after another, and the way they looked at Chen Yu gained more than a trace of scrutiny and suspicion. Just then, several noble young ladies, who were usually on good terms with me, all stepped forward to speak on my behalf. I ran into second Miss Shui in the garden today. The silk flower in her hair was indeed this one stained with flower juice. That's right. While we were viewing the garden just now, I saw it perfectly clearly as well. Second, Miss Shui never once wore the silk flower in the top scholar's hand. Chen Yu's face turned deathly pale in an instant, and a fine sheen of cold sweat broke out across his forehead. In a panic, he dropped to his knees and begged forgiveness, wanting to smooth things over as quickly as possible. It was this humble subject's momentary foolishness in mistaking the silk flower flower. Offending second Miss Shui was truly inexcusable. I only beg your highness for mercy. He was trying to use a single line about having remembered it wrong to lightly brush aside every fault and erase the suspicion that he had deliberately dragged someone else into it. But how could anyone in the hall today be so easily fooled by him? Princess Huining was my elder sister's closest confidante from her maiden days, and she despised this kind of petty man who framed women more than anything. At once, she knitted her brows and was the first to speak up and challenge. Then, whose silk flower is the one in the top scholar's hand? Exactly. Could it be that the top scholar already has a secret sweetheart, and this item is a token from that woman? Your affair with that woman cannot be made public, and today the silk flower happened to fall by accident. You were afraid your secret would be exposed, so, in your panic, you casually dragged second Miss Shui into it to cover for your sweetheart. If that were the case, not only could you protect your beloved, you could also easily marry the second daughter of the Prime Minister's manor. That would be the best possible outcome for you, wouldn't it? Princess Huining's words tore through Chen Yu's dark intentions and mercilessly laid all the scheming in his heart bare before everyone. Hearing this, the Empress's expression darkened, and the way she looked at Chen Yuka was full of suspicion. My elder sister sat upright beside the Empress, her gaze fixed tightly on that silk flower. Her brows were drawn together, and it was obvious she had already realized something was wrong. She was already preparing to voice her suspicions. Without changing my expression, I gave her a faint shake of the head, signaling with my eyes for her not to speak for the moment. My elder sister was quick-witted and instantly understood what I meant. Though she was full of doubts, she ultimately fell silent. The atmosphere in the hall began to stiffen. Every eye was locked onto Chen Yuke, kneeling on the floor. Chen Yuke was trapped with no way forward or back, yet he had no defense to offer. Just as the Empress's patience was about to run out, a tall and powerfully built figure stepped out from among the noble ladies. Roar's face was slightly flushed, carrying a touch of shy sweetness as she softly asked the Empress for forgiveness. Please forgive me, Your Majesty, the Empress. This matter began because of me. I beg Your Majesty not to blame the top scholar. Roar cast a deliberately bashful glance at Chen Yuke, who was kneeling on the ground. The silk flower in Brother Ke's hand is mine. Brother Ke and I have long since grown fond of one another. I gave him this item myself. It is only because my He family set down a rule long ago that my future husband must marry into the general's manor. Brother Ke's family has always placed great importance on carrying on the family line, so he still needed to make repeated plans regarding marrying in. So after the silk flower accidentally fell today, Brother Ke feared our secret affair would be discovered by my father, who would then force him to marry into our family. In his moment of panic, he resorted to this desperate measure and falsely claimed the silk flower belonged to second Miss Shui, using that as a cover the moment her words fell. Several of the young ladies from earlier also began speaking up, one after another, in support. Now that eldest miss, he says it like that. I suddenly remember when we were strolling through the garden and admiring the flowers earlier. Eldest miss, he was wearing that exact silk flower in her hair. No wonder it looked familiar earlier. Eldest miss, he really was wearing this silk flower. Now everything makes sense. Chen Yu's whole body turned rigid, and his expression became ugly to the extreme, as if he wished he could faint on the spot. He knew perfectly well that this silk flower was Shu Jijin's token of love to him, and had nothing whatsoever to do with Roar. But now that Roar had stepped forward to claim it herself, if he denied it in public, then the matter of who the true owner of the silk flower was would definitely be pursued further. And if that ended up implicating Shu Jijun in the Eastern Palace, things would become troublesome. Weighing both sides, he had no other choice. He could only be forced to accept this so-called fine marriage with eldest Miss He. Under everyone's gaze, Chen Yuke lowered his head stiffly, gritted his teeth, and cupped his hands. His voice was dry and hoarse. "I report to your majesty, the empress. Every word eldest Miss He has spoken is true. This humble subject's mother does not permit this humble subject to marry into another family. So, in my panic, this humble subject dragged second Miss Sui into it. It is all this humble subject's fault. On another day, this humble subject will certainly prepare generous gifts and personally call upon second Miss Sui to apologize." At this point, he no longer dared mention asking the empress to bestow a marriage at all. But Princess Huining was not about to let him off so easily. The top scholar is in love with eldest Miss He, yet he is unwilling to marry into General S. household. Once he was found out, he casually latched onto the second daughter of the Prime Minister's manor instead. If things had truly gone your way today, wouldn't that mean you had betrayed eldest Miss He while also ruining second Miss Shui? I think for a man with such crooked intentions, a little punishment is only proper. Princess Huining looked at Chen Yuka with lofty disdain, then turned to the displeased empress and said, "Auntie, if you ask me, since the top scholar and eldest Miss He are in love with each other, then we should fulfill their wishes and have the top scholar marry into the He family. That way, eldest Miss He's wish is fulfilled, and it also serves as a small punishment for the top scholar's absurd conduct this time. It would kill two birds with one stone." The empress was also furious that Chen Yuke had concealed things again and again, nearly causing her to tie the wrong red string and ruin my marriage fate. She immediately issued an order to choose an auspicious date and have Chen Yuke marry into General S. household. I smiled faintly, my merits and achievements hidden deep. After that little incident passed, the banquet soon grew lively again, but the looks in the eyes around us had clearly changed. The way everyone looked at Chen Yuke was filled with contempt. After all, no matter how many difficulties he might have had, he should never have casually smeared a woman's reputation with the way he conducted himself. His character was obvious at a glance. He was absolutely not someone worth befriending. Now that Chen Yuke no longer had the support of the Prime Minister's manor, and today had also let everyone see through his hypocritical face, his road in officialdom would surely be much harder than it had been in my previous life. But this was only the beginning. The days of suffering ahead for Chen Yuke were still long. The flower viewing banquet soon came to an end, and I took my maid Sishu with me as we slowly walked along the palace wall. In this life, I had finally escaped the very first trap, and now I had time to slowly plan what came next. At that moment, a familiar voice called out from behind me, "Second, Miss Shui, please wait. I have something to say to you." But I ignored him and quickened my pace instead. Just hearing Chen Yuke's voice made me sick, and, besides, how could I possibly give him another chance to set me up? Still, Chen Yuke walked much faster than I did, and before long, he caught up to me. "Second, Miss Shui, I only want to ask, what exactly is it about me that dissatisfies you so much?" I frowned and stepped back, putting distance between us. "Lord Chen, mind your words. I have nothing to do with you. So why should I be satisfied with you?" He pressed forward, step by step, a trace of displeasure entering his tone. "Is there any part of my looks or talent that is unworthy of you? Why do you refuse this marriage?" All I felt in my heart was disgust. In my previous life, I really had not noticed that he was this full of himself. Did I lack looks and talent? And on top of that, my family background was 1,000 times, 10,000 times better than his. Why should I have to marry him before I could even speak Sishu at my side had already had enough. She thrust out her hand and shoved Chen Yuk hard. If you want to talk, then talk. Why are you standing so close to my young lady? Or are you trying the same old trick again, making others misunderstand on purpose so you can take advantage of the situation? Chen Yuk's face turned livid. He seemed enraged that even a maid dared to talk back to him. Second, Miss Shui, your Shui family is a great household with 100 years of standing, and Prime Minister Shui's name is renowned throughout the court. I never expected a maid of the Shui manor to be so lacking in manners. I let out a cold laugh and looked at him with open disdain. My maid is not someone for Lord Chen to discipline. So Lord Chen also knows that the Shui family is a distinguished house of 100 years, and that my father's name is renowned across the court. In that case, if I Shui Juyi wish to marry, whom could I not marry? Why would I set my sights on a Lord Chen of ordinary birth? Therese a top scholar every 3 years. Not impressed. Chen Yuke still wanted to say something more, but when he saw Aunt Fangkao from my elder sister's side approaching, he could only give it up. With a smile, Aunt Fangkao invited me second, Miss. Her Highness, the Crown Princess asks that you come to the Eastern Palace for a talk. I gave a slight nod and took Sishu with me, following Aunt Fengkao all the way to the Eastern Palace. The moment I stepped into the warm bedchamber, my dignified and steady elder sister immediately reached out and pulled me tightly into her arms. Even her tone was steeped in lingering fear. Ju Yi, what exactly happened at the flower viewing banquet? At the time, I really thought the top scholar had truly fallen for you. I was thinking that although his family background was ordinary, there was nothing to fault in his looks or his learning. With father and me backing him in the future, he wouldn't have to worry about his prospects. You've always been spirited and freewheeling, never the type to swallow other people's temper. A husband from a slightly lower background might actually have been a good thing for you. I never could have imagined that beneath that gentlemanly facade, he would be so false and vile inside. For the sake of his own selfish gain, he casually dragged you into the mud and ruined your reputation. Hez, simply not human. Wrapped in my elder sister's warm embrace and feeling the sincerity of her concern, my heart softened. I patted her back to comfort her. I knew everything she did came from wanting what was best for me. My temperament was far from gentle, and only by marrying a husband who would need to rely on her and father could I live comfortably. In my previous life, she truly had promoted Chen Yuke quite a bit and given him no small number of opportunities. And Chen Yuke had fooled her too, always putting on a show in public as though he were deeply devoted to me. Otherwise, Chen Yuke and Shu Jijun would never have been able to frame her so quickly. In my previous life, my elder sister had ultimately met a miserable end, hanging herself in the cold palace with hatred in her heart. In this life, even if it costs me my own life, I will protect her to the end. Elder sister, if I told you I've lived through one life already, would you believe me? Startled out of her wits, my elder sister's eyes flew wide as she reached out to feel my forehead. Ju Yi, were you frightened too badly today? How could you say something so absurd? I knew this matter was far too unbelievable for anyone to accept easily, so I leaned close to her ear and slowly told her everything from my previous life. From Chen Yuk's marriage trap at the flower viewing banquet, to the cold calculations after our marriage, to the illicit affair and secret collusion between Chen Yuke and Shu Jijun. Then how they schemed to frame my elder sister, driving her to hang herself in hatred, forcing father to resign from office, and bringing the Shui family to ruin. And finally, how I sought revenge on Chen Yuk alone and ended up perishing together with Himi, told her all of it, piece by piece. After listening, my elder sister stood frozen in place. For a long while, she couldn't come back to herself, and she muttered under her breath, No wonder. At the banquet, that silk flower looked incredibly familiar to me. I felt like it was something from the Eastern Palace. I never imagined it really was. Shu Chengwei has some nerve. As the crown prince's woman, she actually dared to seduce an outside official. But Zhu Yi, why didn't you let me say that the silk flower came from the Eastern Palace back then? I took out Hiruer's silk flower and shook my head at my elder sister. With only a single silk flower that bears no special marking, we can't nail them with certainty. It would only alert the enemy. In our previous life, the two of them were careful enough as it was. That's why we failed to notice anything wrong for years. It wasn't until Chen Yuke held great power in his hands and grew completely unrestrained that I managed to find a few clues. Hearing that my elder sister nodded in agreement, that's true enough. But then why did eldest miss he suddenly step forward to claim the silk flower? Unhurriedly, I laid out my entire plan for her, because in this life I can't wait that long. So before entering the palace, I exchanged silk flowers with eldest Miss He. First, I'll gift Chen Yuke a fine marriage match. With eldest Miss He keeping him in check, he'll soon have no time to help Shu Jujun's scheme. And in this life, without you and father supporting him, and with his true nature already exposed, his official career should be a hard road. Shu Jijun herself isn't particularly clever, and in the Eastern Palace, she isn't especially favored either. Back when you were completely on guard against nothing, elder sister, you simply couldn't be bothered to make things difficult for her. But now that you know exactly what kind of person she is, dealing with her in the Eastern Palace couldn't be easier. After hearing everything, my elder sister was finally completely at ease. Only. The look in her eyes when she gazed at me was full of heartache. When I returned to the Chancellor's residence, I kept nothing hidden. At the very first opportunity, I went to see father and told him everything: today's turmoil at the flower viewing banquet and every tragic event from my previous life. When father heard of his beloved daughter's miserable death and the destruction of our family, he was instantly so enraged that his beard and hair bristled, fury blazing to the heavens. At the next morning court session, he directly impeached the newly titled top scholar Chen Yuke before the throne. In the court, father listed out Chen Yuke's corrupt character one point after another, how he had baselessly dragged a noble young lady into scandal. It was plain to see that his nature was vile and that he was unfit for great responsibility. His Majesty had always held father, the Chancellor, in high esteem. He had already heard a little about what happened at yesterday's flower viewing banquet, and he had already been displeased with Chen Yukek in his heart. After hearing father's impeachment, the emperor flew into a royal rage. He immediately issued an edict transferring the newly titled top scholar, Chen Yuk, out of the prestigious Hanlin Academy and into the court of imperial stud, which raised the emperor's horses, appointing him to the position of recorder, a ninth-rank post from the bottom. His path to glory was cut off then and there. On top of that, 1 full year of his salary was confiscated as an additional punishment. After court was dismissed that very day, Chen Yuke came to my house carrying gifts to apologize. Since he had openly come under the banner of making amends, it would have been improper to have him beaten and thrown out. When he saw me, he offered up the gifts in his hands as apology. To be fair, the gifts had indeed been carefully prepared and could be considered lavish, but the moment he opened his mouth, he became unbearably irritating all over again. Chen Yukek, his hands in salute, his tone barely suppressing his anger. Second, Miss Shui. There truly was a misunderstanding between us over what happened at yesterday's flower viewing banquet, but you should never have had Lord Shui impeach me in open court. I studied in poverty for 10 long years. Do you know how hard that was? Just because of your own selfishness. You severed my future. Isn't that far too cruel? I found it faintly laughable and replied with open impatience. Lord Chen certainly has a talent for turning black into white. Yesterday, in the hall, you baselessly smeared my honor. I merely exposed your scheme. Where exactly does this so-called selfishness come from? With your corrupt character, you were never worthy of standing in court to begin with. Father memorialized the throne in fairness and according to duty. Instead of reflecting on your own faults, you come to my door to question me. Isn't that a little too ridiculous? Chen Yuk clenched his fists and argued back, anger flaring. Yesterday, I had no malicious intent to slander second Miss Shui. I simply felt that marrying me would have been a good thing for you as well. At that point, his tone eased again. But if second Miss now regrets it and wants to marry me after all, that may be a little difficult. After all, Her Majesty the Empress has already bestowed a marriage on me. If second Miss wants to marry me as an equal wife, then Lord Shui himself would need to petition His Majesty in person. For the sake of Lord Shui's years of loyal service, I imagine His Majesty would agree to the match, and when that time comes, as long as Chancellor Shui is willing to help smooth things over for me and restore my former post, I won't pursue today's matter any further. I rolled my eyes on the spot. The man was seriously sick in the head, acting like he was some irresistible treasure everyone was dying to snatch up. Lord Chen must have had too many daydreams and forgotten his own worth, let alone becoming your equal wife even. If the seat of your principal wife were placed right in front of me, I would never spare it a second glance. The looks and talent you prize so highly are worth less than nothing in my eyes. The marriage with the He family was personally bestowed by the Empress. There is no one under heaven who can change it. Lord Chen should behave himself and be a proper leave-in son-in-law of the He family. Stop coming to the Shui residence to humiliate yourself. After saying that, I could not be bothered wasting another word on him and directly instructed the steward, see the guest out. As for someone this blind to his own place, stop him at the gate from now on. Chen Yuk's expression turned ugly beyond compare. In the end, he could only swallow all his unwillingness, grit his teeth, and leave in utter humiliation with his pile of costly gifts. As I watched his retreating figure flee in a panic, my eyes remained calm and still. I understood perfectly well that this man was vicious, ruthless, and poisonous at heart. He would never give up so easily. As long as he still had even the slightest chance to breathe, he would rack his brains to scheme and claw his way upward. He Ruer's temperament was not meticulous enough. I had to lock down their marriage completely. Only then could I cut off every last retreat Chen Yuke had and leave him with no room left to struggle. So after returning to my room, I picked up my brush and wrote a secret letter. In the letter, I carefully urged He Ruer to hurry up and prepare for her marriage to Chen Yuke, striving to get the matter settled as soon as possible. At the same time, I gave her a pointed reminder Chen Yuk's ambition ran extremely deep. So after the wedding, she absolutely had to keep a strict watch over him. She must not be deceived by appearances, soften her heart, and indulge him, much less give him any opportunity to make connections with powerful patrons. After finishing the letter, I folded it neatly and handed it to the librarian, ordering her to deliver it to the general's manor at once, without the slightest delay. He Ruer truly handled things at a pace that suited me perfectly. Not long after receiving my letter, she brought along her 5 older brothers and abducted Chen Yuke right off the street. She even threw out a ruthless warning to the passers-by around them. Chen Yuke is the husband I'm taking in as my leave-in groom. Sooner or later, hell, be entering our household anyway. I'm just bringing him back today, so I can enjoy him first. Listen, well, this man belongs to me. I don't want to see anyone acting unclear or inappropriate with him. Otherwise, your end will be just like this millstone. After saying that, Ruer lifted the stone mill by the roadside, carried it around the street for 5 full laps, and then smashed it to pieces with savage force. Chen Yuke was burning with humiliation and rage, struggling desperately, yet Ruer held him in place with a single hand and left him utterly unable to move. It was said that from that day on, whether man or woman, no one dared come within 10 meters of Chen Yuke again. That very night, word came out of the general's manor that he was terribly impatient. After bringing Chen Yuke back to the residence, she directly consummated the marriage with him first. According to the manor servants, earth-shaking noises came from Miss Hess' room. He only stopped tormenting him deep into the night, and during that time, alone, she called for water a full 8 times. By the time it was all over, the general's manor even summoned a physician to examine Scholar Chen's condition. The old doctor said that Scholar Chen was rather frail, and 2 of his ribs had been crushed and broken. He needed 1 month of complete bed rest. I was very satisfied after hearing that. With Chen Yukak unable to move for 1 month, I imagined Ruer would take very good care of him, and 1 month was more than enough time for elder sister to deal with Shu Jijun. After that, Ruer sent me letters every so often, updating me on Chen Yuke's condition. When I heard that under her attentive care, his original 1 month of bed rest had turned into 2 months of bed rest, I was finally at ease. Trapped inside the general's manor compound, Chen Yuke was already in no position to save himself. He had no way to secretly pass messages to Shu Jijun in the Eastern Palace, much less any spare strength to scheme and plot on her behalf. Elder sister had long since come to understand Shu Jijun's wolfish ambition. In the past, she had always considered how difficult life was for women of the inner palace. She treated others with extreme tolerance and generosity, never once taking the initiative to mistreat the consorts of the Eastern Palace. As for the utterly unremarkable Shu Jijun, she had never placed much guard against her either. But now that she knew the blood-deep vendetta of our previous life, elder sister no longer showed the slightest trace of leniency in her methods. As crown princess, she held authority over the management and discipline of the Eastern Palace. For her to rein in a low-ranking consort with neither family backing nor abundant favor was as easy as turning over her hand. In secret, elder sister gathered evidence that Shu Jijun had been associating privately with an outside man and secretly exchanging letters. Shu Jijun was shallow-minded. Every scheme she had managed in the past had relied on Chen Yuke's guidance from outside. Without Chen Yuke secretly helping her, she acted in panic and confusion, flaws showing everywhere. In just a little over 20 days, elder sister seized upon her weakness and uncovered solid proof that she had been secretly involved with a guard of the Eastern Palace. The crown prince was already irritated by court affairs, and he had always despised women of the inner palace who refused to stay in their proper place. When he learned of this matter, he flew into a towering rage and drew his sword on the spot, stabbing it straight toward Shu Jijun. A flash of cold light swept past, and before Shu Jijun could even beg for mercy, she died on the spot. Because Shu Jijun came from an ordinary family and was not especially favored in the Eastern Palace either, and because this truly counted as a royal scandal, the matter was handled almost in silence The crown prince even ordered her corpse dragged to the mass grave to be fed to the dogs. Chen Yuke only learned of his beloved's death 2 months later. By then, not even her bones could be found. He wept bitterly in grief and swore he would avenge the woman he loved. But after missing 2 months of duty, he could not even keep his post tending horses. His superior merely told him to go home and wait for news regarding official reassignment, and he truly did not dare return to the general's manor again. So he could only rent a small courtyard in the city and settle there. Yet before he had even managed to hide for 2 days, Hiruer dragged him back again for another long bout of intimate indulgence. After all that torment, Chen Yuki, already weak and depleted to begin with, finally had his body collapse completely. The doctor said bluntly that his vital essence had suffered severe damage, and his foundation had been ruined beyond repair. If he calmed himself and recuperated carefully, he might still live to the age of 25. But if he continued indulging himself and letting emotional distress consume him, then his days were likely numbered. Hiruer had only ever coveted his handsome face to begin with. Her sense of novelty came quickly and faded just as fast. At first, she had found the thrill of taking him by force fresh and amusing, but as the days dragged on and she saw him wearing a mournful face every single day, she quickly lost patience and gradually grew sick of him. Even so, she absolutely refused to let him leave the general's manor by even half a step, instead tossing him aside in a side courtyard. The next time I heard news of Chen Yuke was 2 months later. It was said that he had died suddenly. Hiruer gave him a hasty funeral, then buried him in the mass grave. She said she was granting his wish, letting him rest together with the one he loved. After hearing it all, I was very satisfied with the fine marriage I had bestowed upon Chen Yuke in this life. The hatred of our previous life had already come to an end. From this life onward, every day was a brand new beginning. The end.